A gasp rippled through the gilded ballroom of the St. Regis Hanoi. All eyes were on the woman in crimson. Her hand still raised her face a mask of triumph. Before her, the gentle, pregnant wife of billionaire mogul Marcus Thorne stumbled. A hand protectively clutching her swollen belly, the imprint of a slap blooming on her cheek. The city's elite watched breathless as the mistress, bold and unrepentant, declared her victory. But the real drama wasn't the public humiliation or the shattered illusion of a perfect marriage. The true bombshell was nestled deep inside the womb, a secret waiting to be revealed not by words, but by the frantic telling rhythm of a tiny, unborn heart. Isabella Thorne believed her life was a fairy tale. At 26, she was the wife of Marcus Thorne, a man whose name was synonymous with power in Southeast Asia's tech scene. Their love story was the stuff of legend, a whirlwind romance that saw a humble art curator marry into one of Hanoi's most influential families. Marcus was her everything charming, attentive, and fiercely protective. He had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams, a sprawling penthouse overlooking Westlake, a wardrobe filled with bespoke creations from designers like Kong Tri, and a love that felt as solid as the ancient stones of the nearby Temple of Literature. Now 6 months pregnant with their first child, a son, Isabella felt her world was complete. The nursery was a symphony of soft blues and creams, filled with handcrafted toys and imported furniture. Marcus had been ecstatic hosting lavish dinners to announce the heir to the Thorne empire. He would often rest his hand on her belly, his eyes alight with a joy that seemed to mirror her own. "Our legacy, my love." He'd whisper, his voice thick with emotion. "Everything I do for you and for him." But lately, hairline cracks had begun to appear in the flawless facade of their life. Marcus was working later, his phone calls becoming more frequent and hushed. He'd attribute it to a new acquisition, a hostile takeover that required his undivided attention. Isabella, trusting and devoted, accepted his explanations. She'd wait for him, the chef-prepared meals growing cold on the polished mahogany table, her own reflection in the panoramic windows, her only company. The whispers started subtly, a shadow of a rumor caught in the clinking of champagne glasses at charity galas. A name, Camila, was mentioned in hushed tones by women adorned in diamonds and envy. Isabella ignored them. The high society of Hanoi was a viper's nest of jealousy, and she, the ingenue who had captured its most eligible bachelor, was the prime target. Camila, as Isabella would soon learn, was Camila Tran, a ruthlessly ambitious socialite, and a former flame of Marcus's from his university days. While Isabella exuded a quiet, cultured grace, Camila was a firestorm. Her laughter was loud, her dresses were daring, and her ambition was an open secret. She had recently returned to Hanoi after a stint in Singapore, and her re-entry into their circle was as subtle as a lightning strike. The first time Isabella felt a genuine pang of unease was at the annual Vietnam Innovators Gala, held at the opulent St. Regis Hanoi. Marcus, who was receiving the top award, was uncharacteristically distracted all evening. His eyes kept flitting towards the entrance, his grip on her hand just a fraction too tight. And then Camila had arrived. She wore a crimson dress that clung to her like a second skin, a stark, audacious slash of color in a sea of elegant pastels and classic blacks. She moved through the crowd with the predatory grace of a panther, her gaze locking onto Marcus across the ballroom. Isabella saw the flicker of something in her husband's eyes, not just recognition, but something deeper, more complicated. A ghost of a memory, a shared history that excluded her. Throughout the night she watched as Camilla artfully cornered Marcus, her hand lingering on his arm, her laughter echoing a little too loudly in their conversations. Marcus, for his part, seemed flustered, a state so alien to his usual composed demeanor that it set Isabella's nerves on edge. "She's just an old friend, darling," he had reassured her later that night, his voice smooth as silk. A bit intense, but harmless. He had pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers, and for a moment the warmth of his embrace melted her fears. She wanted to believe him. To doubt Marcus was to doubt the very foundation of her world. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. A week later, a receipt for a lavish bouquet of black roses, a flower Isabella detested but knew was Camila's favorite, fell out of his briefcase. He'd brushed it off as a corporate gift. Then there was the late-night text that buzzed on his phone, a simple thinking of you from a number he quickly deleted. The excuses became more elaborate, the distance between them growing from a hairline crack to a chasm. Isabella felt a profound and suffocating loneliness. The sprawling penthouse, once a symbol of her fairy tale life, now felt like a gilded cage. Her friends, mostly wives of Marcus's business associates, offered sympathetic but ultimately hollow words. They were part of this world, they understood its unspoken rules, the silent accommodations, the turning of a blind eye. But Isabella's heart, pure and perhaps a little naive, couldn't accept that. Love to her was not a transaction or an arrangement. It was a sacred, all-consuming truth. The pregnancy, once her greatest joy, now became a source of anxiety. She felt a desperate need to protect her unborn son, not just from the world, but from the encroaching shadows in her own home. She tried to talk to Marcus to break through the wall he was meticulously building around himself. "Is everything all right, Marcus?" she asked one evening, her hand on his arm, as he stared out at the city lights. "You seem so far away." He turned his face a carefully constructed mask of affection. "Just stress, my love. This deal is draining. Once it's over, it'll be just the three of us. I promise." He tilted her chin up and kissed her, a perfunctory gesture that no longer reached his eyes. Isabella knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that he was lying. The deal wasn't about business. The hostile takeover was happening right under her roof, and the enemy was not a rival corporation, but a woman in a crimson dress who smelled of black roses and broken promises. The fairy tale was over. Isabella was trapped, pregnant, and alone, standing on the precipice of a devastating truth, with no idea just how brutal the revelation would be. The breaking point arrived with an embossed cream-colored invitation. The Thorne Corporation was celebrating its 50th anniversary with a grand ball. It was to be the social event of the season, a testament to the family's enduring legacy and power. For Isabella, it felt less like a celebration and more like a stage for the final act of her disintegrating marriage. In the weeks leading up to the event, Marcus was a whirlwind of activity, but his focus was sharp, his mood almost buoyant. He presented Isabella with a stunning midnight blue gown by a Parisian couturier and a sapphire necklace that mirrored the depths of West Lake. "You will be the most beautiful woman there," he said, his voice brimming with a sincerity she hadn't heard in months. "The mother of my son, the queen of my heart." For a fleeting, hopeful moment, Isabella allowed herself to believe him. Perhaps the affair, the whispers, the lies had been a fleeting madness. Perhaps this night was his way of reaffirming their bond, of showing the world, and her, that she was the one who truly mattered. She pushed her anxieties down, focusing on the baby's gentle kicks a secret language of reassurance between mother and child. The night of the ball, the ballroom of the St. Regis Hanoi was transformed into an enchanted forest from a Vietnamese folk tale. Thousands of orchids cascaded from the ceilings, and the air was thick with the scent of jasmine and the low hum of high-powered conversations. Isabella, on Marcus's arm, was a vision of serene elegance. The deep blue of her gown complemented her pregnancy, and the thorn sapphires at her throat glittered with every turn of her head. She smiled. She mingled. She played the part of the perfect billionaire's wife, all while a cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. She knew Camila would be there. It was inevitable. And sure enough, she saw her holding court by the champagne fountain, not in her usual audacious red, but in a startlingly white, almost bridal gown. The dress was a deliberate, provocative choice, an open challenge. Camila's eyes found Isabella's across the room, and she offered a slow, deliberate smile that was anything but friendly. Marcus stiffened beside her. "Ignore her," he murmured, his grip on her elbow becoming possessive. "Tonight is about us." But Camila had no intention of being ignored. As the night wore on, she seemed to be everywhere Isabella was. If Isabella moved to the terrace for a breath of fresh air, Camila would appear moments later, her laughter sharp and piercing. If Isabella paused to speak with an acquaintance, Camila would glide past her perfume, the cloying scent of black roses leaving a toxic trail. It was a calculated campaign of psychological warfare, and it was working. Isabella's composure began to fray. The climax came just after the main speeches. Marcus had just delivered a moving tribute to his family and the future of his company, concluding with a toast to my beautiful wife Isabella and our son, who will one day lead this legacy. The room erupted in applause. Beaming Marcus turned to kiss her, a public display of affection designed to cement their image as the perfect couple. It was in that moment of manufactured bliss that Camila made her move. She strode towards their central table, her white dress parting the sea of guests like the prow of a ship. There was no hesitation in her steps, no doubt in her eyes. The murmuring of the crowd died down as she approached, a collective intake of breath, creating a vacuum of silence in the grand ballroom. She stopped directly in front of Isabella, who was still seated. Marcus, caught off guard, stood halfway, his smile frozen on his face. "Legacy." Camila's voice was clear and cold, slicing through the silence. "Your son." She laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Marcus, you are a wonderful storyteller, but you seem to have forgotten the main character." She turned her venomous gaze on Isabella. "You poor, pathetic little thing. Did you really believe all of it? The love story. The happy family." Isabella, stunned into silence, could only stare up at her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What am I talking about?" Camila's voice rose, theatrical and cruel. "I'm talking about the fact that the child you are carrying is not the only Thorne heir. I'm talking about the fact that Marcus has been with me in my bed every night he told you he was working late." Gasps rippled through the room. People were now openly staring, their phones discreetly raised to capture the unfolding drama. Marcus finally found his voice. "Camila, that's enough. You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene," she shrieked, her composure finally cracking to reveal the raw fury beneath. "You're the one who has been living a lie. You promised me, Marcus. You promised you would leave her." She then looked back at Isabella, her eyes filled with a terrifying mix of pity and contempt. He was never going to leave me. This, she gestured at Isabella's belly, was just a little complication, an heir for the public. But his heart, his passion, that belongs to me. Isabella felt the world tilt on its axis. The faces of the guests blurred into a grotesque gallery of gawking masks. She looked at Marcus silently, pleading with him to deny it, to say something to defend her. But he stood there, his face pale, his eyes darting between the two women, a trapped animal. His silence was the only confession she needed. Tears welled in Isabella's eyes, hot and shameful. She felt a protective instinct surge through her, a primal need to shield her son from this ugliness. She tried to stand to escape the suffocating scrutiny. "Please, stop," she managed to say. But Camilla was not finished. She saw the tears, the vulnerability, and she went in for the kill. "You think you've won? You think this baby solidifies your position? You are nothing but an incubator, a vessel." And then, with a movement so swift it seemed to surprise even herself, Camilla leaned forward and swung her arm. Crack! The sound was sharp and shockingly loud in the silent room. Isabella's head snapped to the side, the force of the blow sending a jolt through her entire body. A collective, horrified gasp erupted from the onlookers. For a moment, there was only the stinging heat on her cheek and the stunned realization of what had just happened. Camilla the Mistress had slapped the pregnant wife of Marcus Thorne in front of everyone. Isabella stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek, but her other arm wrapped instinctively, desperately around her stomach. The humiliation was a physical blow, a crushing weight that stole the air from her lungs. She looked at the faces around her. The shock, the pity, the morbid curiosity. She looked at Marcus, whose face was a canvas of horror and indecision. And then she looked at Camilla, who stood there, her chest heaving, her hand still tingling, a triumphant, hateful glare in her eyes. The fairy tale had not just ended. It had been violently, publicly, and irrevocably shattered, and as a sharp, cramping pain shot through her abdomen, Isabella realized the slap was not the most painful blow she would receive that night. The real agony was just beginning. The slap echoed in the cavernous ballroom, a definitive, brutal end to the night's festivities. The immediate aftermath was a chaotic tableau of shock and confusion. For a heartbeat, everyone, including Marcus, seemed frozen. Then the world lurched back into motion. Isabella, her mind reeling from the dual assault of humiliation and physical pain, felt her knees buckle. The sharp cramp in her lower abdomen intensified, radiating outwards in a wave of pure agony. A small, involuntary pruos escaped her lips. "My baby," she whispered, her voice choked with terror. Her protective instinct overrode everything else. The shame, the anger, the betrayal. All that mattered was the tiny, precious life inside her. It was not her husband who caught her. It was his father, Arthur Thorne, the family patriarch, who had been watching from a nearby table with an expression of grim fury. He surged forward, his old but still powerful frame moving with surprising speed, catching Isabella's arm just as she was about to collapse. "Get her a chair! Someone call a doctor!" he bellowed, his voice accustomed to commanding boardrooms, cutting through the stunned murmurs of the crowd. Marcus finally snapped out of his paralysis. "Isabella." He rushed to her side, his face a mess of panic and guilt. "My God, are you all right?" He reached for her, but she flinched away. Her eyes filled with more pain than he had ever seen meeting his. In that single searing glance, he saw the complete and utter destruction of her trust in him. Camilla, meanwhile, seemed to realize the enormity of her actions. The triumphant fire in her eyes flickered, replaced by a flicker of panic. Assaulting anyone in this public manner was scandalous. Striking a pregnant woman was a cardinal sin, even in the morally flexible world of the super-rich. She took a half-step back, her gaze darting towards the exits. She had intended to cause a scene to force Marcus's hand, but this was spiraling out of control. I didn't mean, she began, but her words were cut off by Arthur Thorne's glacial stare. You, he said, his voice low and lethally soft, will not move an inch. Security. Two imposing men in dark suits materialized at his side. Escort Miss Tran to a private room, and do not let her leave. Camilla's face paled. She opened her mouth to protest, but one look at the unyielding fury in Arthur's eyes silenced her. Without another word, the guards flanked her and guided her away, her white dress now looking less like a bridal gown and more like a shroud. All focus was now on Isabella. She was gasping her breaths, coming in shallow, ragged pants. The cramping was getting worse. "It hurts," she cried, clutching her belly as if she could physically hold her son in place. "Marcus, it hurts." Despite her flinching away, her fear-driven instinct was to call out to the man she still on some level saw as her protector. Marcus, his face ashen, knelt before her. "I'm here, Isabella. I'm so sorry. We'll get you to the hospital." He tried to take her hand, and this time she let him, her fingers gripping his with a desperate strength. The St. Regis staff, trained for any contingency, moved with quiet efficiency. A makeshift screen was erected around the table, affording the Thornes a sliver of privacy from the hundreds of prying eyes. A medic who was on standby for the event was at Isabella's side, in moments taking her pulse, his face grim. "Her blood pressure is dangerously high. She's cramping. We need to get her to a hospital immediately." "The FV hospital is the closest, with a top-tier maternity ward," the medic announced, referring to the well-regarded Franco-Vietnamese hospital in Ho Chi Minh City, which had a prestigious branch in Hanoi. The logistics of the escape were a blur to Isabella. She was vaguely aware of being transferred to a wheelchair, of being wheeled through service corridors and down a private elevator away from the whispers and the stares. The journey was a torment of pain and fear. Every bump in the road sent a fresh wave of agony through her. She kept her eyes squeezed shut, her hand never leaving her belly, whispering her son's name, a mantra against the encroaching darkness. Marcus sat beside her in the back of his Maybach, a silent, tormented figure. The mask of the powerful CEO was gone, replaced by the raw fear of a man watching his world crumble due to his own weakness. He kept murmuring apologies, a litany of, "I'm sorry, Isabella. I never wanted this. Please be okay." Isabella didn't respond. His words were meaningless static, the buzzing of a fly in a hurricane. The man whose promises had built her world had just stood by and watched it be demolished. His apologies were not for her. They were for himself. They were the desperate pleas of a guilty man, trying to absolve himself, and she had no comfort to offer him. She felt a terrifying wetness between her legs, and a fresh surge of panic rose in her throat. "Something's wrong," she gasped, her eyes flying open and locking with his. "Marcus, something is wrong with the baby." The terror in her voice finally seemed to penetrate his self-pity. He barked at his driver. "Faster! For God's sake, drive faster!" As the limousine sped through the glittering, indifferent streets of Hanoi, leaving the scene of her humiliation far behind, Isabella felt a strange and chilling calm settle over her. The physical pain was immense, but it was the emotional agony that was truly defining. The slap had been a catalyst, a violent act that had shattered the gilded cage. But what echoed in its wake was not just the sound of a hand hitting skin, but the deafening silence of her husband's betrayal. It was the echo of a lie she had been living, a lie that was now threatening to cost her the only thing that mattered. She was no longer just fighting for her marriage or her dignity. She was fighting for her son's life. The emergency entrance of the FV hospital was a blur of harsh fluorescent lights and urgent controlled chaos. A team was waiting, alerted by Arthur Thorne's influential call. Isabella was swiftly transferred from the wheelchair to a gurney, the transition jarring her body and eliciting another cry of pain. Doctors and nurses swarmed around her, their voices a calm but urgent flurry of medical terminology. Pregnant, 26 weeks, presenting with severe abdominal cramping and signs of bleeding following a physical altercation. BP is 160/100. Tachycardic. Get her to the maternity ward, stat prep for an ultrasound. We need to check for placental abruption. Marcus was shunted to the side, rendered powerless and irrelevant by the medical professionals who now held his wife's and child's lives in their hands. He stood in the corridor, his tuxedo looking absurdly out of place, his hands stained with a small amount of Isabella's blood where he had tried to comfort her. He watched as they wheeled her away, her hand still protectively on her belly, her face pale and etched with fear. The doors swung shut behind her, leaving him alone with the crushing weight of his guilt. Inside the examination room, the atmosphere was tense. Isabella was gently helped into a hospital gown, her beautiful midnight blue dress unceremoniously cut away. The pain was a constant, terrifying rhythm. A kind-faced, middle-aged female doctor, Dr. Lien, introduced herself as the head of obstetrics. Isabella. My name is Dr. Lien. We're going to take very good care of you and your baby, she said, her voice a beacon of calm in the storm. We need to do an ultrasound to see what's happening. I need you to try and stay as still as possible. Isabella nodded, tears streaming silently down her temples. Is my baby going to be okay? We're doing everything we can to ensure that Dr. Lien said, her reassuring tone never wavering, though her eyes betrayed the seriousness of the situation. Let's have a look. The room fell silent as the ultrasound technician applied the cold gel to Isabella's stomach. All that could be heard was the soft whirring of the machine and Isabella's ragged breathing. She stared at the monitor, her heart pounding in her ears, praying for a sign, for a flicker of hope. The technician moved the transducer across her abdomen, the grey and black images swirling on the screen. Dr. Lien's eyes were narrowed in concentration, her brow furrowed. Marcus, who had finally been allowed in, after an agonizing wait, stood in the corner, looking on helplessly. There's the baby, Dr. Lien said softly. He's small, but he's a fighter. Isabella let out a choked sob of relief. He was alive. But I am seeing some cause for concern. The doctor continued, her tone becoming more clinical. There appears to be a small subchorionic hematoma, likely caused by the trauma and the spike in your blood pressure. It's a bleed. That's what's causing the pain and the spotting. We need to monitor it very closely. But he'll be okay. Marcus's voice was hoarse from the sidelines. Dr. Lien didn't look at him. Her focus was entirely on her patient. The immediate danger is preterm labor. The stress and physical shock could trigger contractions. We're going to give you medication to stop them, and a steroid shot to help the baby's lungs develop, just in case. As she spoke, the technician adjusted a setting on the machine, and a new sound filled the room. Thump, 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 thump. It was the sound of the baby's heartbeat, amplified by the machine. It was fast, a frantic, galloping rhythm, but it was strong. It was the most beautiful sound Isabella had ever heard. Tears of relief streamed down her face. It was the sound of life, of hope. Dr. Lien smiled for the first time. A strong heartbeat. That's a very good sign. A little fast, he's clearly stressed, but strong. Marcus stepped forward, a wave of relief washing over his face. Thank God, he breathed. The technician continued her work, taking measurements, capturing stills of the tiny profile, the little fists. Dr. Lien was explaining the course of treatment, complete bed rest, constant monitoring, when the technician suddenly paused. She zoomed in on one particular area of the screen, her own brow furrowing in a way that had nothing to do with the hematoma. "Doctor," she said quietly, pointing to the screen. "Could you look at this?" Dr. Lien leaned in, her professional gaze sweeping over the area the technician indicated. The room fell silent again, the baby's amplified heartbeat the only sound. For a long moment, Dr. Lien said nothing. She simply stared at the image, her expression shifting from professional concern to one of utter bewilderment. "What is it?" Isabella asked, a fresh spike of fear piercing her relief. "Is something else wrong?" Dr. Lien turned from the monitor and looked at Isabella, then at Marcus, and then back to Isabella. Her face was a complex mask of confusion and something else, something that looked like disbelief. "Run the Doppler again," she instructed the technician. "Amplify it." The technician complied. The thump-thump sound filled the room once more. But this time the technician moved the transducer just a few centimeters, and then another sound joined the first. Thump-thump, 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 thump-thump. It was a second heartbeat. Distinct, separate, yet beating in an almost identical, frantic rhythm. It was unmistakable. The room, which had been filled with one frantic heartbeat, was now filled with the sound of two. Isabella stared at the screen, then at the doctor, her mind unable to process the sound. "What is that?" Marcus stepped closer to the screen, his eyes wide with confusion. "Is that an echo? What's wrong with the machine?" Dr. Lien slowly shook her head, her eyes still locked on the monitor, where two tiny, flickering forms were now visible. She looked up at Isabella, her voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Thorne, there is nothing wrong with the machine." She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself to announce something utterly impossible. "Isabella, you're not carrying one baby." She pointed a trembling finger at the screen, at the two distinct sacs, at the two tiny, flickering hearts, beating in terrified unison. "You're having twins." The revelation hung in the air, a fact so stunning, so completely unexpected, that it defied all logic. All the previous scans conducted by a top society doctor, chosen by Marcus, had shown only one baby. One boy. The heir. Marcus had been there every time, beaming as he looked at the grainy image of his son. A wave of dizziness washed over Isabella. Twins. How was that possible? They had done scans at 8 weeks, 12 weeks, and the detailed anatomy scan at 20 weeks. All had shown one baby, a single, healthy boy. Then a darker, more insidious thought began to form in the recesses of her mind, born from the night's catastrophic betrayals. She looked at Marcus, whose face was not filled with the joy of an unexpected blessing, but with a ghostly pallor of pure, unadulterated shock. His expression was not one of confusion. It was the look of a man whose carefully constructed lie had just been blown apart by the most undeniable, most irrefutable truth of all. The society doctor, the man he had chosen, the insistence on it being a boy, the unwavering certainty. But all the other scans, she began, her voice trembling as the horrifying implication began to dawn on her. Dr. Pham always said, he said it was just one. Marcus couldn't meet her gaze. He stared at the screen at the 2 heartbeats that had just exposed him, his mind clearly racing, searching for an escape that didn't exist. And in that moment, Isabella understood. The slap, the affair, the public humiliation that was just the prelude. This was the true betrayal. It wasn't just a simple case of infidelity. It was a deception so profound, so calculated, that it had targeted the most sacred space in her life, her own body, her own children. Dr. Lyon, sensing the monumental shift in the room, spoke gently. Sometimes a twin can be hidden, tucked behind the other, especially if the sonographer isn't specifically looking. But at 26 weeks, it's unusual to miss. Very unusual. Her carefully chosen words hung in the air, a quiet indictment. The 2 heartbeats continued their frantic rhythmic drumming, a sound that was no longer just a sign of life, but a declaration of war. They were the beat of a truth that could not be silenced, a truth that revealed that Marcus Thorne had not just lied about his mistress. He had lied about the very nature of the legacy he claimed to cherish. Isabella was not just carrying his heir. She was carrying a secret he had desperately, and for reasons she couldn't yet fathom, tried to conceal. And now, thanks to the violent act of his mistress, that secret was out. Everything had changed. The revelation of the 2nd heartbeat did not bring joy. It detonated in the sterile hospital room like a silent, devastating bomb, obliterating the last vestiges of Isabella's shattered reality. The sound of the 2 tiny hearts beating in unison was a testament not to a miracle, but to a monstrous, calculated deception. Isabella lay on the hospital bed, the doctor's words echoing in her ears. "You're having twins." She looked at Marcus, truly looked at him for the first time since the news broke. The panic on his face was undeniable, but it was laced with something else, the cold, hard glint of a man cornered. It was the look of a king whose carefully constructed kingdom had just been set ablaze. You knew she whispered, her voice devoid of tears, stripped bare to a chilling monotone. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a verdict. You knew, and you lied. Marcus flinched, as if she had slapped him. "Isabella, no, how could I have known? It's a surprise, a blessing." His attempt at feigned delight was pathetic, a transparently false performance that was an insult to her intelligence. "A blessing." Her voice rose, laced with a hysterical edge. "You stood there at every appointment with Dr. Pham, your hand-picked physician, looking at the screen and telling me about our son, the Thorne heir. Was he in on it too? Did you pay him to lie, to erase one of our children from existence?" The accusation hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Dr. Lyon and the technician suddenly became very busy averting their eyes, offering the illusion of privacy where none existed. "That's a crazy accusation," Marcus stammered, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it for the first time all night. "Why would I do that? Why would I hide one of my own children?" "I don't know." Isabella's voice cracked the raw pain finally breaking through her shock. "Maybe one was a boy, and one was a girl, and you only wanted the boy. Maybe you have some sick, twisted reason. I can't even begin to imagine." "But you knew. Your shock wasn't surprise, Marcus. It was the terror of being caught." The two heartbeats still thumping steadily from the monitor served as a relentless rhythmic jury. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. Guilty. Guilty. Before Marcus could formulate another lie, the door opened and his father, Arthur Thorne, swept in. The patriarch's face was a thundercloud of controlled rage. He had clearly been briefed. He took in the scene. Isabella pale and trembling with fury on the bed, Marcus cornered and sweating, the damning image still frozen on the ultrasound screen. Arthur's gaze fell on his son, and the disappointment in his eyes was so profound it was almost a physical force. "I have just had a very enlightening conversation with the hospital administrator," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "And I took the liberty of placing a call to your Dr. Pham. A very nervous man, Dr. Pham. It seems his records from your last scan have been misplaced." Marcus visibly paled. The unspoken threat was clear. The Thorne family's reach was long, and a doctor who participated in such a fraud would have his career destroyed. "Father, this is a misunderstanding." Marcus began, his voice pleading. "Silence," Arthur commanded, and Marcus, for all his billions and his power, obeyed like a chastened child. Arthur walked to Isabella's bedside. His expression softened as he looked at her, a flicker of genuine compassion in his hardened eyes. "Isabella," he said gently, "I am profoundly sorry. For the humiliation you suffered tonight, and for this unforgivable deception. Whatever my son has done, the Thorne family will not abandon you or your children." He glanced at the monitor, a flicker of wonder crossing his face at the sight of the two distinct forms, two potential heirs. He then turned his full attention back to Marcus, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You will tell me why. You will tell me why you would deny your own blood. Now." Trapped between his furious father and his devastated wife, Marcus finally broke. The lies, the bravado, the carefully maintained facade, it all crumbled. He slumped into the chair in the corner, his head in his hands. "It was complicated," he mumbled. "Complicated does not suffice when you are lying to your wife about the existence of your child," Arthur thundered. Marcus looked up, his face a mask of desperation. "It was Camilla," he said, his voice barely a whisper. She's pregnant too." The air was sucked out of the room. Isabella felt a fresh wave of nausea, so intense she thought she would be sick. It was a betrayal on a scale she could never have conceived. "I found out a few months ago," Marcus continued the confession, tumbling out of him in a torrent of self-pitying misery. "She claimed it was mine. She threatened to go public to ruin everything. The anniversary, the launch of the new subsidiary. The timing was a disaster. She wanted me to leave you to marry her. She was obsessed. And your solution was to lie to everyone," Arthur demanded. "I was buying time," Marcus insisted, standing up, pacing like a caged animal. I didn't know if her baby was even mine. I told her I'd handle it. My plan, my stupid, idiotic plan, was to secure the legitimate heir. Our son. He looked at Isabella. I needed to establish his primacy. A single male heir. It was clean, powerful. It would cement our family line and make Camila's claim if she made it seem like a desperate, pathetic ploy from a scorned mistress. The chilling logic of his plan began to dawn on Isabella. And a second baby, a twin. Complicated, that she said, her voice hollow. It muddied the waters, he exclaimed, almost angry that she was making him admit it. 2 babies. It made it seem messy, less definitive. And what if one was a girl? It would weaken my position. I told Fam to just focus on the boy, to omit the other one from the official reports, just for a little while. I was going to reveal the surprise twin later after Camila's situation was neutralized. I swear it, Isabella. I would never have denied our child forever. It was a temporary, strategic deception. A strategic deception. Isabella repeated the words, tasting their poison. You erased our child from our lives for strategy. You made me believe I was only carrying one baby, grieving a loss. I didn't even know I had all to manage your sordid affair. The sheer cold-blooded calculus of it was breathtaking. He had weighed his children on a scale of public relations and corporate strategy and found one of them wanting. He hadn't just cheated on her. He had played God with their unborn children. Arthur Thorne looked at his son with utter contempt. You are a fool, Marcus. A weak, short-sighted fool. You have taken a crisis and turned it into a cataclysm. You have dishonored your wife, your name, and your own unborn children, all to appease a venomous viper you were too weak to discard. He turned back to Isabella, his decision made. Isabella, you will want for nothing. The full resources of the Thorne family are at your disposal. You and your children will be protected. As for you, Marcus, he said, his voice dropping to absolute zero. You are relieved of all your duties at Thorne Corporation, effective immediately. Your assets are frozen. You will go to the country house, and you will not leave until I summon you. You have made your bed of lies. Now you will lie in it. Alone. The verdict was absolute. In the space of a few hours, Marcus Thorne had gone from the king of Hanoi's business world to a dethroned, disgraced exile. He stared at his father, then at his wife, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. There was nothing left to say. His lies had unraveled, and in doing so had unraveled him completely. Isabella watched him, feeling not a shred of pity, only a vast, empty coldness where her love used to be. The man she had married was a stranger, a moral void hidden behind a handsome face and a charming smile. The trauma of the night, the slap the terror had forged something new inside her. The meek, trusting art curator was gone. In her place was a mother of 2, a woman who had been pushed to the absolute limit and had found not an abyss but a core of steel. The 2 heartbeats on the monitor continued their steady, strong rhythm. They were the only truth left in the room. They were her truth. And she would protect them and herself with a ferocity that Marcus and his mistress could not possibly comprehend. The war was just beginning. The week that followed was a cocoon of enforced tranquility and simmering rage. Isabella remained at the FV hospital, not just for medical reasons, but for sanctuary. Her suite was transformed into a command center, a fortress from which she would plan her counter-offensive. The hematoma was stable, the risk of preterm labor had subsided, and the 2 tiny heartbeats that had upended her world grew stronger each day. They were her fuel, her purpose. Arthur Thorne was true to his word. He visited daily, not with the overbearing authority of a patriarch, but with the quiet deference of an ally. He saw in Isabella not a fragile victim, but the future matriarch of his legacy, the guardian of not one but two of his grandchildren. He provided her with the best legal team in Vietnam, a group of sharp, merciless lawyers who specialized in high-stakes divorces. Spare no expense, Arthur had told them in Isabella's presence. I want this handled with the subtlety of a guillotine, clean, final, and entirely in Ms. Isabella's favor. Marcus was gone, banished to a remote Thorne estate in the highlands of Dalat. His name was scrubbed from the corporate website his office cleared out. The official story, meticulously crafted by Arthur's PR team, was that Marcus had stepped down for personal health reasons to focus on his family during a difficult pregnancy. The story was just plausible enough to quell the rampant speculation. But the real story, the one whispered in the boardrooms and elite social circles, was that the king had been ruthlessly deposed. Camilas Voice was also dealt with. Arthur's investigators had worked with surgical precision. They uncovered her own web of debts and deceit. The pregnancy, she claimed, it was real. But a discreetly obtained DNA test from a coffee cup she'd used at a cafe proved what Arthur had suspected: the baby wasn't Marcus's. It belonged to a married Singaporean businessman she had been seeing concurrently. Armed with this proof, Arthur's lawyers presented her with a simple, non-negotiable choice: disappear quietly with a modest one-time settlement and a signed NDA, or face public exposure fraud charges and the unmitigated wrath of the Thorne family. Camilas, a pragmatist above all else, took the deal and vanished from the Hanoi social scene as quickly as she had appeared. But for Isabella, these victories were peripheral. Her focus was singular. It wasn't about revenge on Camilas, or even about punishing Marcus anymore. It was about reclaiming her narrative and securing an unassailable future for her children. During her days in the hospital, she began to change. The soft, deferential woman who had once organized art exhibitions was replaced by a shrewd, calculating strategist. She devoured the financial reports her lawyers brought her, learning about trust funds, share allocations, and corporate governance. She had once loved Marcus for his charm and ambition. Now she studied the architecture of the empire he had built, not with admiration, but with the critical eye of a conqueror. Her gambit, when she finally revealed it to her lawyers and a stunned but impressed Arthur Thorne, was audacious. "I don't want a simple divorce settlement," she announced one afternoon, her voice clear and steady. The hospital suite was bathed in the soft afternoon light, and she was propped up in bed, surrounded by financial documents looking more like a CEO than a patient. "I don't want cash or property or alimony." Her lead lawyer, a formidable woman named Ms. Vi, raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Isabella, given the circumstances, the infidelity, the public assault, the staggering fraud regarding the children, you are entitled to one of the largest settlements in this country's history." "A settlement makes me a pensioner of the Thorne family," Isabella stated calmly. "It makes me a wealthy victim. I have no interest in being a victim." She looked directly at Arthur. "Marcus's shares in Thorne Corporation, his voting rights, his seat on the board. I want them transferred to a trust that I control as the sole trustee for the benefit of my children." Arthur stared at her, his expression unreadable. Ms. Vi's jaw practically dropped. Isabella was not asking for a piece of the pie. She was demanding control of the bakery. "He will never agree to that." Miss Vi said. That's his identity, his life's work. He will agree, Isabella said with chilling certainty. Because the alternative is that I don't sign a non-disclosure agreement. The alternative is that I give a full exclusive interview to the Wall Street Journal. I will tell them everything about the affair, about the public assault by his mistress, and about the meticulous, medically assisted fraud he perpetrated to hide the existence of one of his own children for strategic gain. She let the threat hang in the air. It was mutually assured destruction. The scandal would not just destroy Marcus's reputation permanently. It would taint the Thorne Corporation name for a generation. It would cause shareholder panic, invite regulatory scrutiny, and become a legendary case study in corporate malfeasance and moral bankruptcy. I will detail how Dr. Pham was pressured to falsify medical records. She continued, her eyes locked on Arthur. I will explain that my husband's immediate reaction to discovering he was having twins was not joy, but terror at his lie being exposed. I will paint a picture of a man and a corporate culture so obsessed with a clean, powerful narrative of a single male heir that it was willing to deny a child's very existence. Arthur remained silent, his steepled fingers covering his mouth. He was a ruthless businessman, and he recognized the move for what it was, a brilliant, perfectly executed checkmate. Isabella had found his single greatest weakness, his obsession with the family legacy. She was using the sanctity of that legacy which Marcus had so carelessly desecrated as her ultimate weapon. She wasn't threatening to take his money. She was threatening to burn his kingdom to the ground. Finally, he spoke, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated respect. "He'll sign, Arthur," said, nodding to Miss Vi. "Draw up the papers." The meeting with Marcus was arranged a week later, after Isabella was discharged and settled into a new, secure penthouse, one chosen and paid for by her from an advance on the trust. The location was neutral, a private conference room at the Sofitel Legend Metropole, Hanoi, a place of old-world power. Isabella walked in, not as a victim, but as an equal. She was no longer pregnant and hiding behind flowing dresses. She had given birth 2 days prior to 2 small but healthy babies, a boy, Leo, and a girl, Luna. The birth had been premature but uncomplicated. Her body was tired, but her spirit was forged in iron. Marcus was already there, flanked by his own lawyer. He looked diminished, a ghost of his former self. The tailored suit hung loosely on his frame, and the arrogance in his eyes was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. He hadn't seen Isabella or his children since the night at the hospital. He stood when she entered. "Isabella, I heard about the babies. Are they—" "They are fine," she said, her voice cool and professional, cutting him off. She did not take the offered seat across from him, but remained standing, a silent assertion of power. "No thanks to you." She gestured for Miss Vi to present the documents. Marcus's lawyer read through them, his eyes widening with each clause. He leaned over and whispered frantically to his client. Marcus just shook his head, a broken man. This is everything," he whispered, looking at Isabella. "My shares, my seat, my entire life." "You have a life," Isabella retorted, her voice sharp as glass. "You have one because I am choosing not to scorch the earth. I am choosing to protect the family name for the sake of my children. This is not a punishment, Marcus. It is a consequence. You proved you are not fit to be the steward of this legacy. So now I will be." She finally sat down, her gaze unwavering. "You will have supervised visitation rights. You will be provided with a generous allowance enough to live comfortably, but not enough to cause trouble. You will, for all intents and purposes, retire from public life. In return, the world will remember you as the man who stepped down for his family. It's a better legacy than the one you were building. You should thank me." There was a long, heavy silence. Marcus looked at the documents, then at his ex-wife, the woman he had so grievously underestimated. He saw not the gentle girl he had married, but an empress in the making. He had created her, in a way. His betrayals had been the fire, and she had walked out of it, reborn, holding his entire world in her hands. With a trembling hand, Marcus Thorne, the deposed king, picked up the pen. He signed away his power, his company, and his future, all to the steady, silent rhythm of 2 tiny heartbeats he had once tried to erase. The Empress's gambit had succeeded, and so the story of the slap that shocked Hanoi's elite took its final, stunning turn. It was never just about a mistress's fury or a husband's infidelity. It was about a deception that ran to the very heart of a family, and the quiet, unassuming wife who rose from the ashes of public humiliation to seize control of an empire. Isabella Thorne, once a footnote in her husband's story, became the author of her own, rewriting her destiny. Not with tears, but with shrewd intelligence and the unyielding power of a mother's love. She proved that the greatest strength is often forged in the deepest betrayal, and that sometimes the most powerful move is not to destroy your enemies, but to simply take everything they hold dear. What did you think of Isabella's ultimate power move? Was it justice or the most brilliant revenge? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of drama betrayal and ultimate empowerment, please give this video a like and share it with someone who loves a story where the Queen finally takes the throne. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next tale of secrets, lies, and stunning revelations. Thank you for watching.